A lot of people know that we need executive functioning skills in order to support reading comprehension, as well as the other reading skills that we need to support reading fluency. But there's not a lot of information out there that ties these two things together and it explains specific strategies that you can use to support both things at the same time. I'm Karen Dudek-Brannan, and I help pediatric therapists be better leaders so that they can make a bigger impact with their services. And today I wanted to talk a little bit about reading and literacy curriculums because when we're thinking about leadership, obviously we want to have an idea of what skills need to be taught within reading curriculums. This is obviously going to make a huge impact on a student's success in school. So we want to think about how all of these different skills are tied together. So I have heard a lot of reading curriculums being criticized by, a number of different people saying, that number one, we're too rigid and focused on skills that make kids hate reading. And then on the other hand, that we are also not teaching kids to problem solve and learn in a way that's going to help them have literacy and language skills that support skills in the real world. So ultimately, obviously, within the education system, we need to be able to give kids the reading comprehension skills that they need because eventually they're going to have to use their reading comprehension skills to learn all those other content areas that they need to know in school, but then also in life and in vocational settings as well. So I think that we all know that this is really important. Now, one of the things that can get a little bit confusing is just knowing how to help kids use strategies as they're decoding words. So in the early grades, there's a big focus on decoding and being able to actually read words or sound words out. And the reason that that's important, obviously, is because we need to be able to decode individual words in order for us to get the big picture. However, when we make that shift to more of the comprehension strategies, and the things that do tend to be, things that we think about when we're talking about executive functioning. So again, executive functioning being those higher level planning types of skills that enable us to engage in goal-directed behavior, things that allow us to problem solve and self-regulate and monitor our own behavior. All of those things are going to be really important when we are reading. And a lot of comprehension strategies that are taught in the classrooms are really focusing on some of those things. So stating the main idea, thinking back and answering inferencing questions, all of those things tie in executive functioning and require kids to self-monitor in a way that, ask them to kind of self-question and think about what they've just read. The problem is that if kids don't have solid decoding skills, then it's going to be really hard for them to get to that point that they can apply some of those higher level strategies. So those things are really important. But if we have kids that are still struggling to decode and are still struggling to problem solve at the word level, then it's going to be really hard for them to make different inferences and things like that. I've often seen problem solving being taught is that teachers will have kids answer reflective questions about what they've read to assess their comprehension, all things that are really good strategies. But kids need to not only apply those executive functioning skills when they're thinking about the big picture, they also need to know to have a strategy when they are coming to unfamiliar words. So one of the most common things that people say to kids to help them problem solve and demonstrate word attack strategies is that they tell kids to sound it out. And so this is kind of the go-to strategy that I've seen. A lot of times people will say things like, look at the pictures, or like I've even heard people say, oh, ask an adult what the word is, which doesn't seem very helpful because, obviously you want to be able to use the actual context of the text to figure it out, because you're not always going to have somebody to just tell you what the word is. To me, that's not a very useful strategy. So what we want to do is we want to teach kids to actually use the orthographic information and the print in order to figure out what the word is and to utilize those decoding strategies. The problem is that a lot of the things that are done in early literacy instruction are kind of bypassing that problem solving process that allows kids to engage in some of those steps and strategies that are going to help them figure out unfamiliar words. One of the most common things that's done is that there are these sight word flashcards that are often sent home. And what happens is that we're kind of just drilling and getting kids to memorize what the words are. And for some kids, they're able to figure that out and they're able to make enough connections just because they're able to kind of implicitly figure out what steps and strategies they can use to pay attention to the letters and recognize the spelling patterns. And so they end up just fine. But for the kids who need a little bit more direct instruction on why we pronounce certain words the way that they are and making that connection between those written symbols on the paper and the sounds that you actually say when you're pronouncing a word and then the meaning of the word, for kids that need a little bit more instruction for that rote drill just isn't going to work. So where we need to kind of fill in those gaps is that we need to give kids an actual strategy that they can use when they come to an unfamiliar word. So this can be useful for if kids are having a hard time reading a word that they have come up against in a text, or if they're trying to spell a word that they don't know. So instead of saying something like sound it out, we can be more specific. What we can say instead is think about the sounds and think about the letters. What we want to do is we want to draw the connection for kids. We want them to draw their attention to those written symbols and then at the same time actively pay attention to the sounds that they're saying. So if you had the word bat on a paper, the way that you would think about the sounds and the letters is that you could even draw 3 lines on a paper and say, all right, let's think about the sounds. B, a, t, a, as you're reading out those letters. So that's one way that you can do it. It's a lot more specific than telling kids to sound it out because you're actually showing them what they can pay attention to. And so then they can use that strategy to look at the letters on the paper or look at the written symbols on the paper and then pair that to something that they're actually verbalizing. Something that a lot of curriculums miss sometimes is that they have kids just kind of sorting letters without verbalizing. It's really important that while they are thinking about the sounds and thinking about the letters, that they're actually saying the sounds. So that's an example of how you would do it at the early literacy level. What you can do for older kids who are having to read longer words with multiple morphemes. So if they have a lot of prefixes and suffixes in them, what you're going to want to do instead is not just say, think about the sounds, think about the letters. What you can say is think about the parts in this word. And then within those different parts, they can think about how to spell those different parts of the word. So for example, if we had the word reaction, there are 3 parts to that word. There's re at the beginning, there's act in the middle, and then there's ION at the end. And so what you can do is that you can break that apart for kids, and then you can think about the sounds and the letters in the first part. You can think about the sounds and the letters in the middle, and then you can think about the sounds and the letters at the end. What is also interesting to point out with that word in particular is that we have re, so there's that one-to-one correspondence between the phonemes and the print symbols. So there are 2 sounds, 2 letters. Act, same thing. There's a one-to-one correspondence. So 3 sounds, 3 letters. But then at the end, we have shun. And so a lot of kids want to write S-H-U-N. But what you can draw attention to there is that this is how we pronounce the end of this word, but this is how we spell it. So you're not telling kids that it's this crazy thing that you have to memorize. You're showing them that that is a pattern, but you're tying the pronunciation to that pattern. That way, when they hear another word that ends with shun, they can think about that ending there. So when we do that for older kids, we could say something more like, let's think about the word parts. Now let's think about the sounds. So the difference there is that what you're doing is that you're giving kids an actual strategy. In order to, again, part of executive functioning is being able to see something and then figure out, okay, what am I doing here? And be able to plan and have a goal-directed strategy. And so that's one way that kids need to apply executive functioning skills specifically to decoding. And so being able to do that efficiently with automaticity is going to require them to have actual phonics skills and actual phonological and morphological knowledge. But then on top of that, we layer that executive functioning by showing them what to do with that knowledge, by teaching them that strategy of going through those steps that I just said. So we need to be able to zoom in and have strategies at the word level. We need to be able to do that at the sentence level. And then, of course, we need to do it big picture, paragraphs, and big ideas and all of those things. So that's what's going to be really important to be able to do in order to support kids' reading and literacy. So I'm actually going to be, in the near future, leading a roundtable discussion in the Clinical Leadership Mastermind Facebook group, where I'm going to be discussing some of these bigger picture topics in education and things that therapists have to deal with, where we really want to think about not just what we're doing in therapy and what we're doing when we have a student in front of us, but also thinking bigger picture about the skills that we can use and the skills that we can teach other people. And I think that what can be really challenging for therapists is that they only have so much time in their sessions. I know for speech pathologists specifically that I work with, when it comes to these language and literacy skills, such as the things that I'm sharing today, a lot of times they can only focus on these skills so much in therapy. What they need to do is share knowledge like this with their staff and have time for collaboration and building relationships so that they can start to make some changes that impact the way services are provided across the board, as well as the way that curriculum is handled at their district level. It can be really frustrating to have all this knowledge and skills and just not really be able to fully use it to make an impact on your caseload. So in the Clinical Leadership Mastermind, what I'm going to be doing is leading a roundtable discussion that's going to show you how you can pinpoint some of the key issues that are impacting the effectiveness of your services, that may be things that seem beyond your control. And we're going to really brainstorm and try to figure out how we can take some of those obstacles and minimize them or eliminate them completely so that you can kind of create your dream scenario where you're making a bigger impact on your caseload, and think creatively about the way that you provide services. Thinking beyond just what you're doing when you have a student in front of you, thinking bigger about how you can use your knowledge and your skills in your facility and your community. So I will share the link to the Clinical Leadership Mastermind Facebook group where those roundtable discussions are going to happen so that you can be a part of that.